let's get one thing clear. I don't take no shit from nobody. Nobody pulls one over on me, I can tell you. So when they told me, I nearly hit the roof. I went right up the bloody wall, and that's the fact. £15. For the love of God, where can you get a coffin for £15? And that's not counting the rabbi's fees. Never mind a stone or some flowers. How can you have a decent funeral without some flowers? I went straight down the dole office and I told them, I gave it to them straight. 50 years he's worked, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, not including Saturdays. Worked his fingers to the bone, he did. But did it make any difference? Did it, be buggered? Excuse my French, miss. It's always the same old story. Those people got hearts of stone. Look what happened with the pension. 70 he was before he got that. And all because he wanted to keep doing a bit of work. Is it a sin to want to work? Is it a crime, I ask you? Do you know what they told me down the dole office? He hadn't paid his contributions. He'd come into the scheme too late, they said. Half the death grant, and that was that. Contributions, he'd paid his taxes, he'd earned it. Why, his whole life was a contribution. It was a young fellow down the dole. Couldn't have been more than 20 at most. He had long hair down on his shoulders and an earring through his ear. Jesus, like a bloody woman he was. And there he was, this little Nancy boy, standing there calm as you like, telling me Mr. Mandel's only to get £15. Well, I lost my temper, I admit it. I shouldn't have, I know I got a terrible temper sometimes. My wife would tell you, God rest her soul. Sometimes I just blow me top. And the little Ponce is there, standing there, giving me all this rubbish, and me thinking of Mr. Mandel at his sewing machine, those 50 years. And, well, I'd had a few pints at lunchtime, if I'm honest. But I didn't mean to break the window, miss. It was an accident. I was just waving my stick because I was upset and in a state. It was only a little window. Couldn't have been worth more than a few bob. It was the drink talking, miss, and that kind of helpless feeling you get when people aren't listening to you. What did the boy want to call the police like that? Or I'm old enough to be his grandfather. I didn't mean any harm, miss. Anyone knows me will tell you I wouldn't hurt a fly. I mean, look at me, miss. These days with my legs, yeah, a fly's more likely to beat me up than the other way around. But I just wanted to see him done right by. You see, he lived for his work, did Mr. Mandel. Even after he'd retired, he wouldn't give it up. We'd be sitting in our little parlour of an evening. I'd be doing the polls. I won £52.7 and 4p in 1958, and that's a fact. Or maybe I'd be reading the evening news if the man from Vernon's had already been round. But whatever I was doing, he'd always be patching up some trousers or running up a blouse from some odds and ends he'd picked up at a jumble sale. He used to haunt those jumble sales. Little scraps he used to pick up. I'd say, what do you want to be bothering yourself with those for? Nothing but rags. Oh, they'll come in handy sometime. He was right. Many a baby was glad of his mending when the mother couldn't afford a new matinee jacket. Or a widow woman with an old twin set going at the elbows. I told him you should charge for what you do. But he was worried if he did, they'd find out and take it off his pension. And if they'd been all like that cupcake down the dole, they would have. Yes, he'd like to keep himself busy. And if it was for children, there was nothing that he wouldn't do, not having been married or having kids himself. The little ones was always in and out of the house for a bit of bread and jam. He was a gentleman, you see, a real gentleman, educated too, went to a proper Jewish school. Not like me. I left school at 12. Well, you had to in those days, but truthfully, I was glad to be short of it. been thrashed by their fathers once too often. They asked me down the dole office what Mr. Mandel was to me. They said it was all in the hands of the social services. But I don't want him shoveled into the ground by the council in some pauper's grave without so much as a by your leave. It's not as if I can do anything myself. I had a few bob put by, but, well, he put it by for me, really. Took a little bit out of my pension every Tuesday. But since he got took ill and went up to the hospital, the house got sort of quiet. The kids stopped coming round it. I took to going up the pub again a bit. And the drink's always been the temptation with me. So now it's all gone. The money's gone. The kids gone. There's nothing left. I'm sorry, miss. I didn't mean to do that. Look, crystalling like a girl. You must think I'm soft or something. Oh, thank you, miss. I'd love one. I don't see many places with a tea lady these days. She's not? Oh, well, it's good you've got the volunteers. 3 sugars, please. Now, don't you try to tell me what I can have in my tea. I didn't come down the citizens to be lectured by the likes of you. I'm not speaking out of turn. You see, it's thank you. It's not as if he had anyone else. The family's all dead. Not that he ever had much time for them. And he never got married or anything like that. Actually, if the truth be told, I think he was a bit frightened of women. He wasn't the marrying kind, if you know what I mean. So now there's only me. And I want to see him done right by. Because 15 years is a long time. Of course, when you get to my age, it goes a lot faster, but 15 years, still. I've got to pay him back for his kindness, because I was in a terrible state when I met him. My wife had just died, and I took to the drink then too. Never washed, rags on my back. Terrible. And he changed all that. I remember I was standing in the post office. I just collected my pension. It was about a month after my wife died, and I'd never been to collect on my own before. I couldn't put her out of my mind. And there, between the queues, I just broke down, howled like a baby. I kept remembering, well, one night we'd gone to bed, same as usual. And when I woke up in the morning, there she was, lying beside me, cold. She'd just gone in the night, never even made a noise or anything, never even woke me up. Mind you, I've always been a heavy sleeper. Perhaps she tried. And there in the post office, I thought how cold she'd been, and I couldn't stop myself. Mr. Mandel came over and put his hand on my shoulder. I tried to shake him off because I can't stand strangers touching me and him seeing me in that state. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. When I calmed down a bit, he took me to the cafe around the corner in Tavistock Place. You know what they say about Jewish mothers? Well, he was just like that. Sat opposite me saying, eat, eat. And me sitting there staring at a plate of beans on toast. He was right, of course. I hadn't touched a thing for days. Well, you don't bother when you're on your own, do you? But he made me snap out of it. I don't know how. Sheer force of kindness almost rammed the food down my throat, followed by a Belgian bun. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Then he took me to his house and made me have a wash and a bit of a lie down till I felt a bit better. And I told him about my wife and things, and how the council wanted to move me to a single flat, shelter flat, Morton, surrounded by a load of old people. Jesus, think of that. A load of old biddies fussing around looking for a bit of how's your father, maybe a second husband. I'd go up the wall. We talked things over. And there he was with his spare room he didn't need, and wondering how he was going to make ends meet now the rag trade had put him out to grass, as he called it. And the rag trade was never exactly generous, wasn't only the cloth where they cut corners. So to cut a long story short, he let me move into his own home. Paying guest, he said. Seemed an ideal solution. So we settled into our little ways. I helped him with the dole office when he had troubles. You see, he'd worked all his life. He'd never had to bother with them before. It came as a bit of a shock for him to have to go down there. He didn't like making a fuss. He didn't want charity. Charity be blowed, Mr. Mandel. I said, it's your bloody right. You've earned it. And I made those buggers. Pardon my French. You sit up and take notice, I can tell you, to get him what was his by right. You have to fight for these things. Like now. I could help around the house too, because I was in the building trade off and on. Not exactly steady, working the lump, and the drink didn't help. But I never lost my touch. He'd let that place go, something terrible. Smell it damp, rot, mold all over the walls. Half the floorboards were rotten. I doubt if he'd even noticed it. Never had the time or the interest, what with all the tailoring. If he'd been married, his wife would have had something to say about it, I'll be bound. So I set about putting it to right. I still had my tools. And what with all the skips around, there was materials everywhere, where there was a lot of rebuild going on. And he took care of all the money and the shopping. Like I said, he saved for me. I paid all my pension to him. He let me have a few bob for fags. Not for booze, not now. I've never had a head for figures, but he had it all worked out. I never even realized how much he'd saved for me till he showed me where the post office book was when he was took sick at last. And on a Friday or Saturday, we'd go out down to the pictures together. We'd argue whether to go to the Empire Mile End or the Regal Hackney. The Regal was classier, but further. I'd choose the film one week. I loved John Wayne. And he'd go for something a bit deeper the next week. And always a pint after in the 10 Bells in Commercial Road. Just the one night. So we got along. It was a real home. Sometimes I've missed my wife, to be sure, but he understood that, even though he hadn't been married himself. Marvelous sympathy that man had. It was a great comfort. Do you understand what I'm saying, Miss? I loved that man. Loved him. Now, don't get me wrong. There wasn't anything funny about it. I'm not like that. And we had our own rooms. Though in the winter, when the weather was very bad and the draft came through the window, something chronic, I won't say we didn't share a bit of warmth from time to time. Never could afford central heating. So it was comfortable. It was always comfortable. Like I'd get a bit of bronchitis on my chest in the damp months, and he'd always be there with a bit of whiskey and hot lemon. Just a small one, mind. Or a smear of Vicks to rub on my chest. Such cool, gentle hands he had. Touched like velvet. Being ill on your own's a terrible thing. I was took bad after you went up the hospital. Most miserable time of my life. Clock ticking on the landing. Not a sound in the house. Couldn't hardly move. You lie there thinking, is it this? Is this time? Will they find me cold in the bed too? Terrible. First day I was back on my feet, I went straight up the hospital to see him, because I used to go in and see him every day. Oh yes. But then I didn't for a fortnight, and there was no way to tell him why I hadn't been in. And you know, when I got there, he was so worried, not for himself, but for me. For me. Are you all right, Michael? Should you be out so soon? Are you looking after yourself? He was worried about me. And him lying there dying. I hated going up to see him in that place. Hated it. It was converted from an old workhouse. And I remember when it was a workhouse too, back in the 20s. Little windows high up on the walls, bars over them, all them smells. I think I took it worse than he did. He was very good about it, very patient. Won't be long now, Michael, he used to say. And the marvelous thing was, he never lost his interest, always wanted to know what was going on. The nurses loved him. Towards the end, I couldn't face going up there without a drink or two. I used to smuggle in a drop of brandy for the two of us. By that stage, Mr. Mandel didn't mind the drinks, not under the circumstances. But then the sister caught me. After that, I went down the pub first. One day I had more than the one, what with the worry. When I got to the ward, he was going. They said he was asleep and couldn't see me, but I could tell from their eyes he hadn't long. Let me in, I said. I know he'd want to see me. He's not conscious, they said. Then how do you know he doesn't want to see me? How do you know he does want to see you? You're not family. You might upset him. He's asleep, I said. What if he wakes up? Round and round we went like it was some sort of game. I begged. I pleaded with him. Tears streaming down my face like a girl. You've got to let me in. He's in there bloody dying. Didn't make a blind bit of difference. Not next to kin, they said. Not a relative, they said. Sorry, but those are the rules and that's final. After 15 years. A couple of porters took me out, but I wasn't going to give up so easy. I waited till the porters had gone and he nipped round the side of the building. Sure enough, there was a toilet window there. You know the sort. The big window underneath and a little window on top. There was bars on the big window, but the little window was open. I went over to the kitchens and there was a couple of milk crates outside. So I dragged them over. The bad leg was killing me. And I got up on top of it. I reached in through the little window, but I couldn't get the catch on the big window. So I took my stick and I smashed it. Took the rubber tip and poked through the window, through the bars. I wasn't going to let him go just like that. They called the police then too, said I was disturbing their other patients. But they knew all right what the real trouble was. Because as they was taking me down the neck, I heard them talking in front of the car. What's the trouble? Asked the driver. Oh, nothing, says the copper. Some old poof kicked the bucket and this is his boyfriend. He's going bananas. What hen? Says the driver. Ought to be past it at his age, dirty old sod. I was too exhausted even to cry, let alone raise a finger to him. Lucky. The magistrate was kind. Otherwise, I'd never got out in time to find out what they were going to do with him. Because they can't keep him down there forever, even with the strike on. And they wouldn't even tell me where he was going to be. Do you think you can do anything, miss? Mrs. Khan next door told me that you help people, the citizens, with the social security and eviction and things. I'm worried they'll just bung him in the crematorium because that's the easiest. But they couldn't do that, could they? I mean, that's against his religion. It's not too much to ask, is it? A decent burial with a few flowers and a bit of music. He'd have liked that. Very fond of music he was. Brass bands was his favourite. And Bing Crosby, if you could try Thursday, I'll be in. Thank you. I'm sorry to take up your time. I wouldn't have bothered you over a little thing like this. I'm sure there are people out there much more deserving. But there's nowhere else to go. See? Oh no, Thank you very much. No, I don't want no social worker to come sniffing around my place, asking questions, moving the furniture. I can stand on my own feet. Don't you worry about me. I can manage. But I do miss him. He was a wonderful man. Well, you've been a great comfort, miss, just by listening. I won't say a great help yet. We'll see what you can do. No, don't bother. I'll see myself out. Thank you. I'll see you on Thursday then. Oh, and thanks for the cup of tea.